Hello and welcome back to the Oxbridge Formula. Today we're here with Sasi, who studies chemical engineering at Cambridge. It's lovely to have you back here. How are you doing today?
Yeah, doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah, not too bad as well. So, why chemical engineering?
So I think my logic to pick it was maybe I should have thought this through more, but I think when I was doing my A-levels, I did chemistry, physics, maths and further maths, and I thought I liked them and I thought I was pretty good at them. So I thought, what kind of subject uses all of these but like isn't just science? Because I think I realized I enjoyed learning the science in school, but I knew there'd be a point where I wanted to actually use it to do something, if you know what I mean. So I looked around a little bit, and then I think I decided pretty early on, I think around like year 10 or year 11, that like the idea of it looked cool, and then like didn't really reconsider like after I got to uni, I think. But yeah, I think it just kind of matched the A-level subjects that I was studying.
Yeah.
And also it just looked like a very good starting point for a lot of different careers, because I knew that I was pretty good at these subjects and I think like liked them enough, but I wasn't set on becoming a chemical engineer. And then I found out that the degree that people do often doesn't really matter when it comes to doing things in like the business world or in consulting or in finance or going into engineering or science or teaching or anything like this. So I just knew it was a good point to go from to decide then like what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So,
yeah, that's very fair, because I think people think you have to study a degree and then go into that line of work, and it's just not true. So I guess leading on from that, what is your plan for after uni, after you've got your degree?
So I'm hoping to go into consulting.
Okay.
I have an internship this summer. I'll plan to get one possibly next summer as well, depending on like when I end up graduating. But yeah, so management consulting is the plan, which is also a good springboard to then decide what you then want to do.
Yeah, wow.
So it's what a lot of people will pick if they're like they like mathsy stuff and like management kind of stuff but aren't sure what to do. And yeah, I think chemical engineering is, even when I went to the Cambridge Open Day, the guy who runs the teaching program, the Chem Eng at Cambridge, said like this is a really good course if you want to do management consulting, because it is very problem solving related. Even compared to general engineering, there are a lot more like reports you have to write up for like coursework exercises and things like that. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of, there's like a little bit of economics related stuff, like a very small amount, and there's you kind of learn a little bit about a lot of different topics. And even if a lot of those are very sciencey or physicsy, those, it's all about transferable skills. It's all those like applicable skills that you learn in those topics, I think, that recruiters and employers really look for as well.
No, yeah, I think that's so true, because I too don't want to go into biochemistry. But like there's so many skills that I've put on my CV that people are so impressed by. And it seems that in this internship recruitment season, a lot of my like PP friends, so like they study economics themselves, struggled to get internships, while STEM students found it really like a lot easier.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously I'm not saying you won't get an internship if you do not like something that's not STEM, but it is crazy how many transferable skills the science degree can give you for other jobs. Definitely.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a little bit of economics in chemical engineering. Can you just give me a little example of where that comes in?
Yeah, so I mean, it's nothing like the Cambridge economics course. Like it's more accounting, if anything. But the way it's applied is like if you're trying to figure out if a chemical process is like economically viable, like if it will make you money in the future, and looking at the cash flows that it will bring in every year and working out, like discounting that back to the present and working out if it will actually turn a profit in the future. And there's like calculations that you learn to figure out if that's true. But we only had four or eight lectures, I think, on it in second year of Chem Eng. So that's another thing. So the first year you study natural sciences or engineering, and then second year you actually go into chemical engineering. So I've only done 1 year of Chem Eng, but you do learn a lot in 1 year as well.
Oh wow, I didn't know that you started off like a year with natural sciences and then sort of specialise into Chem Eng. That's really interesting. So how did you find first year with natural sciences?
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't like it. I think that confirmed to me like why I couldn't just use the logic that I wanted to study like just harder versions of my A-levels.
Yeah.
A-levels are like, you can't even compare them to a science degree. I'm sure you can empathise as well. Like A-level bio and chemist, they're so different to.
Oh yeah.
For more information on Oxbridge colleges, subjects, and to get help with the application process, visit oxbridgeformula.co.uk. Click subscribe and ring the notification icon to be notified when we release new content.
But yeah, I think it was especially like physics, and it was all very like theoretical, and contact hours are notoriously bad for first year NatSci at Cambridge. It's like it's over a 40-hour week or something ridiculous.
The Saturday lectures as well.
Like adding in like time for like the minimum time you have to spend on problem sheets and all that, like it comes up to that much as well. And Saturday lectures, not great. So there was a lot of different things that I was like, I really just want to move on to the course that I'm meant to be studying here. So yeah, second year was like such a relief, I think, because also another thing is the department actually treats you like a human being, I will say. I think NatSci improves in second year as well, but first year NatSci to second year Chem-Eng, like there's no 9 a.m.s for starters. Like first year 9 a.m. every day, Monday to Saturday. Second year 10 a.m. onwards, Monday to Friday. And they just do really nice like welfare kind of things in the department as well. Like there's a lot of lectures. I think there's the same amount as first year, but now squeezed Monday to Friday instead of Monday to Saturday. But they all time it so that there's like a 20-minute break, so it's like 10 to 10:50. Then the next lecture starts at 11:10, so there's like a little break in between.
Oh, that's nice.
And then they do free tea in the like little atrium bit as well of the department, which is really nice, and it's nice that everyone just kind of congregates and like chats to each other, and it means I'm really close with a lot of my course mates as well. So I think it's that, and the fact that it's a very small cohort, that means we all like kind of know each other, and I think we all like get on pretty well as a cohort, which is nice.
Yeah, that's really, really nice. My sister does earth sciences at Oxford, and that's a really, really small cohort too. And everyone just seems to be really friendly, know each other. Whereas biochem is like 110 people, which is like obviously a lot larger. And so, like, I know quite a lot of people, but not all of us are really, really pally. So it's nice that you've got that within Chem-Eng. And what advice do you have to people who are in their first year of Chem-Eng but studying NatSci and maybe not enjoying it so much?
I think just push through. Like there's not really much you can do at that point. I think even for me, like at the end of Freshers Week, I was like, how am I going to do a year of this? Because I just realized it really wasn't for me. But I think it was a good lesson, and sometimes you're not going to like bits of Chem-Eng as well, and you still have to get through those bits. So first year I kind of learned, even if I really didn't like a particular module or a subject, I found it really hard, how to go about getting better at it. So yeah, I think it taught me a lot, but I would just say, if you're really struggling, you can speak to your director of studies or your tutor or someone who will give you options, I think, because there is still sometimes an option to switch course if you're not sure about doing Chem-Eng at all, then Cambridge, it's quite straightforward to switch after first year, I think. And sometimes you can switch like very early into first year as well. So there are options available, I think.
Well, that's interesting that it's quite easy to switch. And I suppose like that's quite fair because you don't know exactly what you want to do when you're applying. And I suppose you get a taste of different things, especially with things like natural sciences, you get a taste of a few different things and then be like, oh no, maybe this isn't what I want to do. I want to do this. So yeah, I think that's really, really good that you've got the option to do that. So what does a typical day for a chemical engineering student look like?
So as I said, there was no 9 a.m.s in this year. There are a couple next year, but in terms of this year, I would get up around like 9ish, so that I could like get ready and like have breakfast and stuff.
Yeah.
I would have to cycle to lectures, so it would take me slightly longer than my friends who'd have to walk. But it is only about like a 10 to 15 minute cycle, pretty fast. So yeah, I would cycle over, and then the department's really lovely. It's a really new building, very like sunny and like full of light and everything. So sometimes a lot of people like get there early and will like get breakfast there, or like get a coffee if they're like tired or anything. And then we'd usually have lectures 10 to 1 or 10 to 12 some days, but there's usually 3 lectures a day. And as I said, there's a little break in between because it can get quite like heavy sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, 10 to 1, most people are in the department. And then what I like about Chem-Eng versus NatSci is like you can just go back to college after you're done with lectures. There's no obligation to stay because there's no like long hours doing a lab or anything like that. We did have 1 lab a fortnight this year, but that's only for the first year of Chem-Eng. But that was only a 2-hour lab, like once a fortnight, so nothing big. And then in the afternoons, most people would get on with their supervision work, or be typing up lab reports, or might have a couple of supervisions in the afternoons as well. Sometimes they're in the department, which is in West Cambridge, so the cycle away from King's, and sometimes they're in people's colleges. So I've had ones at St John's College, Magdalen College, some at King's, so we get to kind of spread around a little bit. And yeah, that kind of takes up most of the afternoon. We always try, or I always try to not be doing too much work after like 7-8 p.m. Doesn't always work, but it's a nice kind of bar to have and be like, I'm just going to chill like after this time. So yeah, that's what I try and get the day to end around that time, and then kind of will chill, or if I've got too much work to do, I'll do a bit more work in the evenings.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. Otherwise, it's just too much if you're working from like 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. or maybe even longer. Like some people are in the library all night. So yeah, I suppose it's good to set yourself a goal of when you can end, because I suppose it's a better structure to your day. Then it forces you to work earlier on in the day. Whereas I just don't have that limit, and so I just put it off and put it off and put it off, and then I'm like, oh no, that was a really bad idea. Yeah, so I think that's a really, really good idea. So what sort of lectures have you had in Chem Eng recently?
So we've had, it's felt like a very disjointed range of stuff sometimes, just because it's hard to see how it all connects. But a lot of it, we've had a lot of fluid dynamics this year, so like the physics of how fluids move and things like that. We've had thermodynamics, so like heat flow, and a lot of like very basic stuff that we build on in the next year, I think. So those are like the pretty heavy ones from this year. I think those were the very like mathsy ones that a lot of people struggled with.
Yeah.
There are some like shorter like add-on ones, I think, that aren't as like core Chem Eng, but they are important to know as well, like the bits of accounting and econ that I said. We had a safety module as well to talk about how, like, because that is quite a big part of Chem Eng as well, I've learned. We've learned about like separation procedures for how to like separate different chemicals once they've reacted. But it was very different to doing natural sciences, because we had like 4 lecture courses. So I did like physics, chemistry, materials, maths, and that's what I learned. I knew what I was coming into every lecture and learning about.
Okay. Yeah.
But with this year, I would just turn up at a lecture and be like, I have no idea what like separations means, but I'm going to find out in an hour. So it's a lot of the names seem very like different, and like I had no idea what any of them meant half the time, like before I came. But yeah, I quite like that. I quite like that you do learn a bit about everything rather than like deep diving into a lot of things. And yeah, even like there's a big biotechnology module as well, and I really missed biology because I didn't even do it for A level, so it was nice to do a bit of bio as well. So yeah, it's a big range of stuff.
Yeah, it does sound quite broad, and I think that keeps it exciting for sure. And what module or what areas have you found the hardest, and then how have you gone about improving the way you tackle it?
So as I said, I think the thermodynamics and fluid mechanics are probably the hardest.
Okay.
And even so the ex-engineering students who had done engineering in the first year, they had done a bit of fluid mechanics, so I think they were a bit more advantaged than people who had come via natural sciences.
Okay.
But I think everyone really struggled with these modules, and I think the way to sort it out really was supervisions. And it's so important to get a good supervisor, and I think it's important to kick up a fuss with your director of studies if your supervisor isn't doing a great job, or like your quality tutor in Oxford, I think, as well. But yeah, so I think that made a big difference, because we had some problems with my supervisors for both of these modules, and I think it really affected how much I could take in lectures to start with, because I wasn't able to clear up my problems with the lectures in the following supervision.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I would just get more and more confused, and then the next set of lectures wouldn't make sense, and then I'd struggle with the problem sheet. And yeah, I think it's just good to keep on top of that, and then make your director of studies aware of it pretty early if it's not happening. And I think the other thing is talking to other students as well. And I was like, we have a big group of people who do chemical engineering at King's, my college. So yeah, there's 5 of us, I believe. So yeah, I'd always be able to like knock on my friend's door and ask, like, do you have any idea how this problem works? And sometimes it's reassuring as well. Sometimes if it makes sense to no one, then it's reassuring as well, because it means, you know, like it's really, really hard and none of us know how to do it. Yeah. So I think it's a good like sense check to have that as well.
So you mentioned about tutorials. What does a typical tutorial look like for you as a chem eng student? Like what sort of things do you do?
So it's a pretty similar format for most of them. It will be, well, so we will have been set a problem sheet in our lecture series for that supervision or tutorial. And then our supervisor will get in contact with us by email. Sometimes we'll have to contact them if they've been particularly busy and it's maybe slipped their mind. And they'll give us a set of questions to do for the first supervision or the following one. We'll try and do as many as we can, which is usually a reasonable amount of questions. Sometimes they'll set a bit too much and it's kind of not that reasonable. But yeah, so we'll try and complete as many as we can and then hand it into the supervisor so they can mark it. And during the supervision, it's a pretty standard format. Like we will just go through each question and the supervisor will talk about who struggled with which question. They'll often write out how it was meant to be done. The best supervisors, I think, go back to like the conceptual stuff. So they'll actually talk through like what the building blocks of like what built it up in the lectures. So for example, with like fluid mechanics, we had a lot of cases where the supervisor was just writing out the maths of the question and we had no idea where he'd got the model for this particular fluid and like where he'd got these equations from.
Okay.
And he didn't even know, I think, sometimes. So I think it's just really confusing when like you're just following a set of instructions but you have no idea where any of that's come from.
Yeah.
I think that's the case in like a lot of science and a lot of engineering. Like I think that's the hard bit. Like the actual maths is okay once you get used to it, but it's like figuring out how to set up the whole question, which is hard. But yeah, so the supervisor will often, the good supervisors will talk through that. Some will just go through questions, but I think, yeah, it's good to kind of assess if the supervisor is working for you. Sometimes it is hard to switch supervisors, but it's always worth bringing up with director of studies, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so because tutes are such a good way of clearing things up. And if you don't have a good tutor then, or supervisor, then yeah, it's obviously not going to be ideal. And what's been your favourite tute from this year? Is there one that stands out?
Oh, yeah. So I think it was my separations supervisions, because like purely because of the supervisor. Like she also lectured us for that series. And I felt really bad because we'd always go into that supervision and like she'd be like, oh, how were lectures this week? And we'd be like, yeah, they were good. And then we'd have loads of questions on like all the problems that she'd set, and she'd be like, am I like a really bad lecturer? Like, is it my fault?
No.
It was just, the content was just really hard and then we just had a lot to clear up. But she'd always just, it felt like she like reached into our brain and like jiggled it around and just made it make sense. Like it was so good. Like those are the best supervisors, I think, when they just kind of, they can see, like, even if you can't articulate what you're exactly struggling with, like the concept, but they can tell just because they've taught it so many times, or like they had the same problems when they were learning it as well, and they can kind of apply that to like teaching other people. And yeah, she wouldn't, also I think there's a case in supervisions where like people will just kind of nod along and be like, yeah, like I get that. But you're just so literally, you're just so tired that like you kind of give up at a certain point with like trying to understand it, and you just want the supervisor to carry on. But she will always check and she'll always be like, can you explain it back to me? And then like there were a lot of moments of being like, oh no, like she's called me out. But yeah, it was never like to make fun of anyone or to like catch anyone out. It was just because she really wanted us to understand it. And I think that's what like shone through in the supervisions. And we'd all just walk out being like, feeling like we just done a workout. Like we just had this like endorphin rush of like, we'd like learned so much and like just, we felt so much better about the course. And like, I think it just shows like, even if it perhaps wasn't my favorite topic, I think she was my favorite supervisor, and that really made the big difference.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that's the perk of going to Oxford and Cambridge, is having that intimate like tutorial system, because even if you're in a group of 10 or 12, like you're not going to get enough individual like attention to be able to understand it fully the way you want to. So yeah, I think tutes are really, really important. And you said you're a cohort of 5 in King's, so do you have your tutes with your 5 and then a tutor, or are you split into 2 and a 3, or how does that work?
So yeah, it really depends on the supervision. So 4 of us at King's came via doing natural sciences, and 1 came by engineering. So usually my friend who did engineering will have supervisions with other ex-engineers, so she won't really have them with other people from King's. But yeah, we tend to have the same, it's me and 2 other girls who usually be in a supervision group together. But it's really up to the supervisor. Sometimes I've had supervisions with people from like random colleges like Magdalen and like Sydney, Sussex and other places. So it's also a nice way to like meet other people on the course as well. And like I think you can get complacent in supervisions when you kind of know everyone there, and like there's one person who talks a lot and like you might rely on them a little bit, but if you're always with new people, then you kind of need to, you need to speak up and do your bit in the super. So it's good.
That's actually a really good point, because there's one guy in my tute group. I always sort of have tutes with the same 3 other people, and we know one guy will answer no matter what. And then if there is an awkward silence, one of the other ones we always know will pop up because he hates the awkward silences. So it's great. So I just sort of sit back and I'm like, I'm not going to say anything till I must do. Like, it's really chill. Yeah, so that's a really good point. And it does keep you on your toes, I suppose, which is really, really good. And you mentioned that you have labs, not very commonly, but can you talk to me a little bit more about what labs look like for a chemical engineer?
Yeah, so they're usually, well, all of the labs are based around fluid mechanics. But you don't have to know any fluid mechanics prior to doing them. They kind of all start from scratch, and you can learn from the basics. So that we'll usually, or I would try to read the whole lab like instructions part in our like lab book before going to the lab, because you get 2 hours seems like a lot of time, but it often really rushes by and you have a lot of data to collect in that time. So for example, we had one that was like there's like a vertical tubes of sand and like little glass balls, and you flood like air and water through them and see how much the bed like rises by, and you have to measure like how much it rises for a particular velocity of fluid flowing through it. And most of it is just kind of twisting a knob and collecting data and twisting it again and collecting data. But I think the challenging bit comes after that, when you have to write the lab reports, and they placed a lot of weighting on them in ChemEng compared to when I did natural sciences, because there is a big coursework module, and I think, I don't know the exact percentages, but a lot of that is made up by the lab reports. So there's a very specific structure that has to be adhered to when you write lab reports, and sometimes it did feel quite unfair the way we were marked, like, because you get a different marker for each report, and sometimes like they'd mark you down for the most like harsh things, and it was quite hard to like get started with it, I think, because it's just, the format was just very different to how we'd been used to doing them, and we were just quite confused. But I think we found our feet with that pretty quickly, and I got like better and better at it, I think, because I would like pre-write the bits that I could pre-write before actually going to the lab, and then all I would have to do is like write up the analysis and put in the data and stuff, and it would be very quick, because otherwise I think the coursework really builds up as well, because we've got that and problem sheets and like lectures to keep up with and everything else. Like, I think it was way more manageable than doing natural sciences, but it's still, you just, like you said, like, it's good to just be like, I have to do this in this time, rather than let it like bleed into the rest of your time, because that's when it gets difficult. And the other thing is, we have these things called exercises as well, which are another part of the coursework part of the course. So those are, they're really weird sometimes. They're like I said, you have to write reports sometimes on like a brief that you've been given. So it'll be something like a company might be considering doing or using a different reaction route for a particular reaction, or like a particular process that they've got in a factory, and they want to know if it's like economically viable, if it's like what the yield would be like for this reaction, and like different like stats on it, and you have to come to a conclusion about like whether it's worth switching to this new reaction. And that's like writing up, it's kind of like in consulting, like when like a client has a particular problem, and you have to like analyze all the data and then like give them these insights and like what you think they should do. So yeah, there's sometimes like coding and programming involved in that, in like manipulating the data and like getting results from it. And typing that up and everything, it's like, they're usually pretty longish reports, so that takes some time as well. But that definitely adds a lot to the coursework burden. But yeah, again, it's bearable, and I think you're given lots of time in advance. You're told a lot very in advance, like when you need to hand stuff in and things. So I think you can tell who's on top of it, because they've already done all the work that needs to be done like pretty early, because the deadlines are pretty reasonable most of the time. But I think you can get extensions from your director of studies, or if needed, like if you've been really ill during a particular week or something's gone on, then like you can get extensions and things. So okay.
And what do the deadlines tend to be?
So for a lab, you do the experiment itself, and then you have to hand in the report 2 weeks from then, I believe. maybe it's a week actually. It might be a week. It's been so long, I've forgotten. I think it's a week actually. So yeah, that's why it was good to like pre-write them. And with exercises, we had a long one over the last term, which was over about 2 months.
Oh, wow.
But that was like there was quite a lot to do for that one. Usually they're about 3 weeks that we get from like being given the exercise to having to hand it in. So yeah, I think as long as we kind of split up the work, it's quite manageable.
And then the lab report, is that just like sets of questions that you've got to answer, or is it more like a essay type report whereby it's obviously split into sections, but there's a lot of writing?
Yeah, so there are like specific questions in the lab book that we'll need to answer in the report. So like, does your data follow this particular equation from the theory, and like testing things like that. Sometimes markers are pretty picky and they'll be like, why haven't you answered this thing that wasn't on the lab book, but like I wanted you to answer it, which is like, how was I supposed to know that?
Yeah.
But yeah, usually I think one of our labs was marked so badly that we could appeal the mark, and that the guy who we appealed to was like, yeah, this is stupid, like I don't know why he's marking like this. So there is some standardization, but yeah, it's usually as long as you answer whatever's in the lab report, you tend to be fine.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting, because ours is just sort of like we finish our lab and then the set questions, we just sort of fill it in and we, you know, plod along with our day. Honestly, I think I've got it bad, but I clearly really don't. So
I think there are different difficult things about every subject as well. So yeah.
Yeah, it depends what you want to put yourself through, I guess. So I want to talk a little bit more about your application to Cambridge. So firstly, did you always know you wanted to do chemical engineering at Cambridge, or did you look at Oxford, some courses at Oxford?
I looked at Oxford briefly, but you have to do, I'm not sure if this is true, but it looked like you had to do like general engineering for at least a couple years before you could specialise and do chem-eng. And chem-eng, I mean, at Cambridge, you can go straight into chem-eng, as in you have to do something else in first year. But then you obviously you don't have to do any engineering, and I was like, I really don't want to do all of that. So yeah, I think, and the other thing that was appealing about the Cambridge course was the fact that you can do a different subject in first year, even though I didn't end up liking it. I didn't know that at the time, and I was like, oh, like you get to do a different course for a year and like see if you like it, and you can stick with that if you want to, or switch if you want to as well. So yeah, I just thought the Cambridge course looked very flexible, which I liked.
Okay, yeah, I mean that definitely makes sense. And did you have to do an admissions test for chem-eng?
Yeah, so our year was the second year, I think, to have to do this admissions test, and I think it was more demoralizing than my interview, because it was just so time pressured, and like there's a multiple choice section at the start when like you have like 30 seconds to do each question. It's ridiculous. And then the second part is like written questions, like written answers to things. And that bit, I think I did like half a question and like a quarter of a question or something ridiculous. Like I really didn't get to finish very much because I realized I picked a question I really didn't understand and it was too late to go back. And then after that I was like, yeah, that's my place, that's goodbye to Cambridge for me. But yeah, it's really not good to place too much weighting on it, I think, because they always say this, but they do consider it in relation to like your SAQ, which is your like extra personal statement you submit for Cambridge, and your like marks from your AS levels and stuff. They do look quite a lot at UMS, which they've gotten rid of now, but that's why I think they might be placing more weight on the admissions test, but it's still not the only thing they look at all. And it's like, it's a ridiculous thing, I think, to base someone's work on, because it's just really stressful, and like you don't learn much about the student from it, but got to be done, I'm afraid. But yeah, it's not the end of the world if it goes badly.
Yeah, I suppose they get so many applicants, they've got to have something to try and like, you know, yeah, knock it down a little bit, but yeah. It must be quite stressful. And what test did you do for that?
So it's the natural sciences admissions test. So
oh yes, the natural sciences one.
Yeah, so I think Cambridge has one for every different subject now, or almost every subject. So yeah, I think the multiple choice was, you picked the ones you'd done A-levels on, so they had ones on like maths and chemistry, physics, and then like probably like some extra harder maths ones as well. And then the longer answer questions were on like similar ones, so you just picked the ones you thought you could do, which didn't turn out great for me. But yeah, so it should be all stuff you know from your A-levels, I think. I don't think they told us to revise anything extra. Okay. But I just did some, there were like a couple of practice tests available, I think, and that's what I kind of tried to work through just so I could get used to the timing of it, because I think that was the main issue.
So was that the main way you prepared, or did you do other things as well?
So I looked at the couple of past papers they had online at the time, and I think I just looked on the student room and saw what people had done the year before and like how they'd revised. Oh, I did use I think I used some BMAT papers, so the biomedical admissions test,
Oh, wow.
because they do have a couple of similar modules. And again, it's just the time pressure to get used to that. So yeah, I think I used the past papers from the natural sciences test, some BMAT papers, maybe like some UK HAT papers, I don't really remember, but I think if you Google and see what people have done, that's usually a good starting place to see like what is a good idea to revise.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I suppose it's so different to any test you've ever done at A level and things, so it's just a completely different set of skills you need to practice. So yeah, I guess practice is key. And then I suppose personal statement is another really important thing in your application. So how did you demonstrate your passion of ChemEng on your personal statement?
So it's really hard with ChemEng because it's hard to get work experience, because a lot of plants aren't going to let like a 15-year-old onto their like big scary chemical plant. I managed to kind of get a backdoor way into that because I have family in India who like knew people who like worked at a particular plant, so I could at least go in and talk to some people there and say that I'd like got into this plant and like found out some bits about it. But that's really not expected. Like they really don't expect anyone to have any work experience of it, I think. And I think the way to show passion is just to read around the subject, and I guess just there are ways to reach out to people who work in this industry, I think, because like there's always like careers fairs and networking events like going on, like even when we're at school, I think there's, if you just Google, like there's always like outreach events from people working at these companies and things like that. So I think like talking to those outreach people is a good idea. And it's not, I don't know, like it obviously matters like what you write, and I think it's not appreciated when people just write like, I spoke to this person and it was cool, like just for the sake of it. Like obviously they want you to say like what you actually talked about and why you found it interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's good to say like it shows a lot of passion that you've approached these people, but I think actually saying like what you ended up talking about or like what you actually read in this book that you read is the main thing. So yeah, I think reading is the way to like, that's the surefire way to like do any of this stuff. Like obviously it's not always possible to reach out to people, but I read you don't have to read a lot. I read like a couple of books and just talked about one in depth, I think, and I think it was about fracking, and like how like assessing the actual impact of it and how like it's not actually impactful in certain ways and it's really bad in other ways. And I just talked about like the fact that I found that interesting because the way it's portrayed in the media is very like fracking is terrible, like we should all stop doing it. But the book kind of talked about like other perspectives on that and like how I was trying to weigh up what I actually thought about it. So I think that's what they're looking for, like when you're looking for different viewpoints on things and you're like trying to look at the subject in a complex way more than just like I want to learn maths and science and very generic stuff. So that's the way to like being specific, I think, is the way to stand out in these personal statements.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You've got to show that you've engaged with what you've read or listened to or watched, etc. You can't just be like, I did this and this and this and this, because tutors are not going to be impressed. But you need to say like why you found it interesting, why it's important, like if that contradicts anything else you've read and etc. Yeah. So that's like a really, really great tip. And what did you find hardest about writing a personal statement?
I just didn't know the balance to get right, I think. I had a few like I think it was like twice as long as it was meant to be when I first like wrote everything I thought I could write about. And then I was like trying to weigh up like what would a tutor want to see more than another thing, like what's going to make me look better and things like that, because I had a lot of like things I found interesting, but obviously there's just not a room to put everything in. Trying to get the balance right with like extracurriculars as well, because Oxbridge, or at least Cambridge, don't look at that stuff very much. Like they're not, unless you relate it to like your time, well, not even time management, but like if you relate it to like showing that you're very hardworking and like you've really applied yourself to get to like grade 8 violin or anything like that. Other than that, like they don't really, it's not a massive deal to them that you've done grade 8 violin, you know what I mean? So like that wasn't really worth putting on there for me. But I knew that there are other unis I was applying to and I didn't want to just focus completely on like getting into Cambridge. So trying to get the balance right with like different unis I was applying to and like what they would all probably want to see. That was quite hard. But I think we did have one like UCAS person at our school who was very exhausted and running around trying to sort everybody out, so she didn't really have time for like Oxbridge people specifically. But yeah, I think asking people around at school, like I just got random teachers to read it and asked what they thought of it and like if they would, like what they would change about it, or like what they would want to know about me, like if they didn't know me in person. And just reading, like the student room is a good place as well to just try and read other people's statements, obviously not to copy or anything, but to just see how they've structured different parts of their statement, so like their introduction and how long they actually spent on that part, and how many different books they talked about and how much they focused on each one. So yeah, that's just a good way to make sure you don't like list loads of things like you said, because that's not great, but also don't just concentrate on one thing. And I think that's a hard balance to get if you are just going through it by yourself, so it's good to just ask around.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good idea. And I suppose also, like, if you are worried about having different personal statements, like this will suit Cambridge, but it may not suit other universities, You've also got the SAQ, like you said. So have you got any tips for that?
For the SAQ?
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing for that one. I think I just looked at extra stuff. I thought about putting in my personal statement and looked at like the best bits from that I thought I might want to write about. And also I think I mostly tried to talk about Cambridge specific things as well. So the fact that like you got to do natural sciences in first year, and how I like really like love doing sciences in school, and like how the specific ways the specific things I liked about like doing sciences related that to the course, and like the specific modules of Chem Eng you get to do at Cambridge, the supervision system particularly, and how I not just like why I would want to do it, but why I like thought I would be good in the supervision system, because you kind of do have to back yourself a bit, I think, and be like, yeah, I think I cope well in like stressful situations. I think that's when I learn best, and I think like supervision situation, like I would enjoy like being put on the spot in this way, and I think like Cambridge is the only place I can get that. Obviously I think that's kind of what I wrote, but I think with each person, like I think it involves like actually thinking about why you want to go to Cambridge as well, because that means you can't just be applying for the name of it or anything. Like you actually have to look at what is it about the course that you find interesting, and that's what you should be putting on your SAQ, I think.
Yeah, that's a really, really great tip. So making it more like Cambridge specific, why you want to apply to the Cambridge course and why you like that so much. Yeah, that's really, really, really good tip. Yeah. Because obviously at Oxford, I have no clue what even the SAQ was for, because you don't have to do one for Oxford. But yeah, it's really, really interesting. I think that's a really good tip. And then obviously there's the dreaded interviews. So how was your interview experience?
I don't know, I feel like my brain's blocked parts of it out, but not because it was like terrible. I think just because it's always going to be a stressful day, and it all just feels like a bit of a fever dream, because it's also like you just get there, and especially with King's, like it's these like big buildings and it's all very imposing and big, and I remember it just felt so like I felt like I was up against this big wall that was in front of me, and I had to like climb this huge thing to like be part of this like elite group or something. And because obviously now I look around King's and it feels like home, but it's really weird. I looked at it back then and it just felt like I was like trying really hard to get there, but it just felt so impossible. But yeah, so I think it's just quite an intimidating place to be like at interview. The interviews themselves were like, my first one was, I really enjoyed it actually, and I think that the interviews put me quite at ease. The second one like wasn't as good, but I think that's always the case. Like there's always going to be one you prefer to the other, and I didn't come out. It's weird because people come out saying like if you left thinking it went really badly, it probably means you got in, and if you left thinking it went really well, it means you probably didn't do that great.
Yeah, I heard that.
And that's always true, but I think it's true for a lot of people. But I kind of like, I was like, I don't know, like it was fun, I guess, but like I'm not like, oh, I definitely got in now. I didn't think I'd made any big mess ups, but I like just didn't really know what to think of it. I knew I'd like done what I could, and that's all I came out thinking. But a lot of my teachers were like, oh no, you have to have thought you did really badly to like eventually get in. And I was like, it doesn't have to be the case. But yeah, it just shows like whatever you think the case was, like you just have no idea what the tutor will have thought of you during the interview, and you just kind of got to let it go into the universe and see what comes out on results day. So
Yeah, definitely. I agree. There's literally no way of telling. Like my second interview was horrendous. I came out crying and I cried all the way home the next day too because I was like, I've just completely ruined my chances. And then I got in. So there is no way of telling. And what sort of things were you asked in your interview?
So they started me off very simply in my first interview. I think because they can tell people are really nervous.
Yeah.
So they literally just started off. They gave me they told me to plot a quadratic curve, which like anyone in like year 10 or year 11, a lot of people in year 10 or year 11 could do. And then asked me how I would find the area under it. And I was like, is this a trick question? Do I just have to integrate it? I'm not sure. Because everything it just felt like it should be really hard, but they really do start you off like somewhere you can have access to. And then they went on to talking about because like it's obviously a chem eng interview, but they kind of just mixed it with like maths NatSci related stuff. So we talked about like a pendulum swinging and how I would plot a graph showing that, and how I would plot the distance of the pendulum from the middle, and then how I would plot the speed and how those curves related to each other. And yeah, I think we talked about that stuff for a bit. Some of the questions were really weird. Like one of them was, I think it was like, it sounded like a very like typical like Cambridgey kind of question. It was, is it possible for 10% of drivers to be above average, or 90% of drivers to be above average? And my initial response was like, no, like that's obviously not possible because like it's 90%, like average is going to be like 50%. But then he was like, are you sure? Which was like, you should probably think about it more. And then I like wrote out like an example of like rating drivers on a scale of like 1 to 10, doing that with 10 different drivers, and like working out it was possible for 90% to be above average. So I think it's just sometimes they'll ask you stuff that's you'll have like a gut reaction to, but they really just like seeing that you're like thinking through stuff and like the exact thoughts that you're having and like the ways of approaching stuff. Even if it's like wrong, they just appreciate that you're telling them like what you're thinking, because that's teachable. And that's what I knew, like even if I had no idea what I was doing in the interview, as long as I was just saying what I was thinking, no matter how dumb it sounded, like everyone had told me that's what you should do, so I just kept doing that. And even if I didn't get a lot of stuff right, like I think that reflected quite well, which is reassuring. It means like you don't have to be really, really smart and get loads of stuff right in the interview. Obviously you should try, but it means just saying what you're thinking is enough so that the supervisor or tutor can tell, like, could I be teaching the student? Are they responding to what I'm telling them, like the extra information I'm giving them? And like, would they find supervisions helpful is the ultimate question, I think, as well. Because if a tutor knows like the student would struggle, and I think they think that the student would like just not cope well in the system, then it's just not great for both parties to like have to have the student attend this course at Cambridge, I think, because it's supervisions are stressful for everyone. And I think if you're not like used to that system, or like you're not teachable in that system, then it's just so stressful for the student. So yeah, I think that the tutors are really just trying to gauge like, is the student suitable for this as well. So yeah.
I think you've summed that up perfectly, like really, really perfectly, because it is about, can they teach you rather than do you know everything there is to know about chemical engineering. I think that's so important to note, that they are just seeing if your way of learning suits the tutorial or supervision way of learning. So I think you summed that up really, really well and gave a lot of good tips there, so that's really, really great.